Hello and welcome back to the Eyes Up Life podcast. I'm your host, Ben Granis, founder of Eyes Up, which started as a 7,000-mile bike ride around the United States to raise awareness for distracted driving, to promote digital wellness, and fundraise for a nonprofit called Text Less, Live More, whose mission is just that. Along the way, we raised over $50,000 to fight distracted driving and to help Text Less, Live More accomplish their mission. So thank you so much to all of you who contributed and helped make this journey possible. Now, the bike ride is in the rearview mirror. Of course, I'm still riding my bike, but the big Eyes Up journey has wrapped up, and so too has the Maxis series. Hopefully you've checked out all of those episodes. There's 21 of them with really incredible people, athletes of all kinds and experience levels. So check those out if you haven't. But you're here to listen to my conversation with Cycling Mikey. Mike is a London legend. People know Mikey for his YouTube videos where he records people either driving distracted or breaking the law in some way on his way to or from work. And he's become infamous for catching people, and the police love him because he is helping with traffic safety. And I think it's really interesting that there are dozens of people, hundreds even, Mikey says, just like him in the London metro area who ride around on bikes with cameras and catch people doing things they shouldn't be doing and is helping to make the roads safer. He notes specifically an intersection that has been notoriously dangerous, and how since his work has started that it's become a lot safer and people are much more aware of the rules and what they should be doing. What Mikey does is an interesting, unique approach to the distracted driving problem, and I'm excited for you to listen in on his background, why he does it, some of his experiences, and how, if this could translate into something in the United States. I'm not sure it will, but it is an interesting take. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Cycling Mikey. Enjoy, and we'll talk to you at the end. Well, it's good to meet you. Thank you for taking the time to chat. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, Ben. Nice to meet you too.
So tell me a little bit about your background. What's your story? Why are you wearing a road safety shirt? Why do you have a YouTube channel? Just some general background would be awesome.
Yeah, so I'm a Dutch Zimbabwean. I was brought up by Dutch parents in Zimbabwe, which is why I sound a bit like a South African to some people. And obviously my family are big into cycling and using what's called a Velo Solex, a motorized bicycle. And I grew to love cycling. And then, I came to the UK in 98, and I had some bad health for a while. I became a type 1 diabetic. So I didn't cycle or do much exercise for 5 or 10 years. And then I started cycling again. Well, first skating and then cycling. And then I just got the hell in with the way some British drivers would treat cyclists. And imagine it's much the same in the US. And very unlike what you get in the Netherlands.
Yes.
And then around 2006, we saw the first early digital cameras come about. I think it was an Oregon Scientific, I forget the name of the camera, but I think it recorded in 240p on 2 penlight batteries. It was a terrible camera, but quite a few of us immediately realized how this could change perceptions around road safety and around how drivers would treat cyclists.
So you were unhappy with drivers for a long time before the camera was even around. Is that right?
Yeah, I started probably about 3 years or so that I was cycling here in the UK, and I suddenly realized how badly some drivers would treat cyclists. Now, there's quite a lot of hate for cyclists here in the UK, and I believe in the US. Whereas in the Netherlands, my home country, that would be considered pretty weird.
Right. So actually, some more background would be helpful. So you were born in the Netherlands or in Zimbabwe?
I was born in Zimbabwe. To complicate matters, my parents were born in Indonesia when it was a Dutch colony.
Oh, wow.
And they were as children in concentration camps during the Second World War.
Wow.
So yeah, but basically we consider ourselves Dutch. Pretty much all my family live in the Netherlands, bar a couple. Um, and we have strong connections back to the Netherlands.
So did you spent time in the Netherlands as well, or
Yeah, mostly holidays, most just visiting family, spending time there, that kind of thing, riding around, lots of cycling because, it's our way.
right? But you never lived there full time.
Never lived there
You
full
went straight
time.
from Zimbabwe to the UK
Exactly.
back in '98. Okay. Well, where in the Netherlands? I have a personal connection to the Netherlands because my sister and brother-in-law live there. Where in the Netherlands is your family located?
From Apeldoorn in Gelderland, which is the province of Gelderland,
Okay.
kind of in the middle.
Okay. My sister and brother-in-law and their family are in Den Bosch, which is,
Okay.
I think, pretty central,
Yes.
I would say. But
We're descendants of quite a famous admiral called Michiel de Ruiter.
mhm.
And I quite enjoy teasing my English friends about how in 1667 he burnt the English fleet at Chatham.
Oh man. Okay, well that's yeah, so that's those are very different cycling cultures. The Netherlands, the Dutch have an amazing infrastructure and respect for cyclists, and they almost have priority over cars, it feels like. Versus
Yes.
I've never ridden a bike in the UK, but from your videos and from what you've just said, it sounds like it is similar to the US, which I actually didn't know was true.
Yeah, I think the sizes of the roads are different, and obviously we drive on a different side. But otherwise, the sort of attitudes and cultural infrastructure and that sort of thing seem to be somewhat similar to me.
So has advocating for safer roads been your career, or is this a side thing? Like, do you have a full-time job that you work, during the day or no?
Yeah, I have a full-time job. This is not so much a hobby for me as civic duty. And probably it's only really quite a small effort on my part because I think I catch an average of about a driver a day over the last 5 years. And that takes about 15 minutes of video splitting and reporting online to report one driver. So I don't spend that long doing it. I quite often get accused, oh, why don't you be a policeman? Or you failed the test to be a policeman. Well, I've never wanted to be a policeman. I don't think I could handle the death and the blood and the gore of being a police officer.
Right. It's a lot more than just traffic safety for sure. Um,
Yeah, and there could be some very good efforts made towards infrastructure, but I don't feel I have a strong lever in getting people to change infrastructure. Whereas with a GoPro camera and the ability to report these traffic offenses online, I do have a strong lever to change driver behavior.
so walk me through what your first reporting that you did. How did you know that you could report people to the police with an effect, and how did it sort of snowball from there?
So the whole process of reporting people took a lot of effort from lots of people and a lot of time to come to the point that it is at now. Back in 2006, the only reports you could do were in person at a police station and by burning a CD or a DVD and filling out a long report. So you'd really only bother for the most egregious of crimes, like, I don't know, a very dangerous close pass. Sort of ordinary level close passes you wouldn't bother with because it'd just take too much time and be too much hassle. Um, Before 2006, when we didn't have video, there was very little point in reporting anything because a lot of companies would just take their driver's word over it, and the police wouldn't be able to act without an independent witness. So yeah, after 2006, either reporting online to the police or to an employer with video was a little bit effective. Not very, but a little bit. And then somewhere around 2008, 2010, I forget exactly, here in London, they moved to using this police group called RoadSafe, who were more about fixing problems like when an intersection was demonstrably unsafe or things like that, and about education. So, and they basically moved to that because they were getting flooded by reports from cyclists, not just me. I'm just one of many. I mean, maybe I'm the most well known at the moment, but there are lots of people reporting. So then they moved it to road safe, and they would now quite often write the registered keepers of vehicles if there was some bad driving with words of advice. And that was a bit effective. It wasn't perfectly effective, but it would definitely change the behavior of some repeat drivers that I would see regularly on my commute. And then around about 2018, they moved from doing this to actually prosecuting drivers via a formal reporting system with the traffic offense reports in that that the police use themselves. So they would actually take our evidence, and if there was enough evidence, they would go and prosecute the driver.
And so that's pretty
And
recent that was a change, 2018.
yeah, like 6 years ago. It may have been 2017. I don't remember exactly. I didn't pay that much attention.
Sure.
I was busy with other life stuff. And then I suddenly started seeing more and more prosecutions going through. And I remember being annoyed when they altered the form because I was like, well, this is harder to do than it was before. And they're asking for far more details. But once I realized they were doing proper prosecutions, I'm absolutely fine with this. And then I realized that actually I can make a difference with drivers who aren't just directly affecting me. So, not just the people who do a near miss on me while driving on the roads,
Hmm.
but people I see going through red lights that didn't affect me, people on the phones, people going on the wrong side of the road. And then because I realized that had an effect for everybody, I started reporting as much as I could.
How did you know that these folks were being prosecuted? Like, is there a way to like see the follow through on the reporting system?
So the feedback from the police has been on and off, and it's currently quite bad. Originally, the idea was that they would give feedback to everybody who reported, but I guess that takes up police time and probably resulted in some complaints to the police when things weren't followed up. To be fair to the police, most of those complaints are without any basis, and it's more because many of us cyclists didn't know what the required level of evidence was for something to be prosecuted. Taking someone to court over a driving offense isn't as easy as it seems. Just seeing someone holding a phone isn't necessarily enough evidence to get them prosecuted for mobile phone driving, if that makes sense.
So then what would be an example of an appropriate level of evidence? Because I've seen, several of the people that you've recorded are, they just have their phone in their hand at a stoplight.
Yeah. So before March last year, there was an older version of the mobile phone law in existence. And with that, it was much harder to prove a mobile phone offense. Effectively, you had to show the person was holding a phone, using the phone, and additionally using it for some kind of interactive communication. So that would be WhatsApp or messaging, iMessages, or making an actual phone call. So if they were just holding it and say looking at maps, that wouldn't be enough. Basically, then people realized this was a problem, and they updated the mobile laws, and now it's quite a bit easier to show that a phone is being used. So you have to show, for example, you have to show now that you have to show the number plate of the car. You have to show that the car was not parked. It was in a live lane of traffic, even if it stopped at the traffic lights. Then you have to show some version of hand holding of the phone, and then any kind of use of the phone, be it just looking at the screen, lighting up the screen, talking on it, using any of the apps, taking pictures, that kind of thing. So they tightened the law up a great deal.
Do you think you had anything to do with that?
Maybe indirectly, maybe just as a result of what they saw. But I think the primary driver was quite a well-known case called the Crown versus Ramsey Barreto. Ramsey Barreto is a driver who got caught by the police taking pictures of a crash on a motorway. I guess it's a freeway in America.
Yeah.
And they prosecuted him, and he was found guilty at a more ordinary court, and he appealed, and the case was thrown out because he was only taking pictures, and the original law did state interactive communication.
So if he had been sending a text message instead of taking a photo, it would have
Yeah,
been a
if he
different
had been
result.
provably sending a text
Right,
message.
right. Which is also hard to
So
prove.
exactly. And a lot of successful reporting to the police comes down to knowing what evidence is prosecutable and what is not.
Hmm.
So, for example, somebody going through a red light, here in London, the police won't prosecute unless the light's been red for maybe a second or so, or if the driver's flooring it to go through the light. So it's not as, you're supposed to stop for an amber light, because here in London, you get a green light means go if it's safe to go.
Right,
When you get an amber only light, that means you should stop unless it's safe not to stop.
right.
But nobody would ever be prosecuted for going through an amber light. And a red light means you must stop. But again, they won't prosecute until it's been red for about a second or so. So that, it's not quite as easy as you think.
No, yeah. I mean, these are questions that I've had swirling around in my head around enforcing it. And so this has been really interesting to see a civilian doing this work. And so I'm curious. I mean, it sounds like you ride your bike for a means of travel and recreationally as well. But do you have a direct connection to distracted driving, or like, is there something that really motivates you? Because this is a lot of work that you're doing. I mean, for some
Yeah,
reward, but
it is quite a bit. On the other hand, I do still have time for my job and for my hobbies and family. And sometimes it does get too busy, and then I'll drop reporting drivers because I want to have a life too.
right.
It's a civic duty for me, and I don't like doing admin much, and this is mostly just admin. So filling out forms, keeping my spreadsheet up to date, it's a pain in the butt, really. So there are a couple of things that motivate me. Probably the biggest one is the way drivers treat cyclists in the UK. I want to have a change of that. I want to have drivers being worried that if they misbehave around a cyclist, that they'll get reported. And then there are consequences for that.
Hmm.
A lot of people, the nature of cars make us think that we're enclosed in our own social space, and it makes people feel that it's a little bit more on the private side than in public view. And I think we need to change that and make people realize there's a risk of being caught. And with criminology, it's the risk of being caught that stops people offending rather than the size of the punishment, if
Interesting.
that makes sense.
Yeah, well, can you talk a little bit more about that?
So yeah, and then going on to some of just to keep with the other motivations.
Sure.
Another motivation is trying to, walking around with my kids, and part of my job is looking after my boss's son who has Down syndrome. And crossing the road with him, well, he's a little slower than the rest of us. He gets distracted more easily, and you really have to pay attention to what drivers are doing around you. And it does worry me. And because I'm employed by his boss, the idea of assessing the risk is a little bit more formal than it would be with my own kids. But on the other hand, I've been with him for 10 years, and he's pretty much nearly like my own son, one of my own sons anyway.
Wow.
So I feel quite strongly for his safety. Some of you might have seen him actually. He and I were in a very viral TikTok video where a Royal Guard stepped closer to us for a photo.
Oh, no way. I try to stay off TikTok, Mike, so I haven't seen it.
Me too. I think it had like about 200 million views in about a week on all the social medias, because obviously everybody copied it for clout.
Right. Wow. That's cool.
So yeah, he means a lot to me, and that's one of the reasons I'm really hot on distracted driving. Okay, and then the final reason is when I was 19, my dad was killed by a drink driver. So that was pretty rotten. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but it does sort of just give me that little bit of steel to if it's 9:30 in the evening and I really rather just kind of stop, but it gives me that little bit of steel to finish one more report.
That was in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe.
Yeah, a long time ago in
Yeah.
Zimbabwe. But to save someone else the heartache of having to cope with that is it's a good thing.
Right. Well, so can you talk more about the what you were saying before, the notion of being caught versus the actual punishment?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm certainly no expert on law enforcement and criminology, but I think one of the real big principles is it's the risk of being caught that stops people offending. Um, so yeah, having lots of people out there, citizens The famous footballer David Beckham was caught by a pedestrian, for example.
Distracted driving?
Yeah, he was driving, I think, in Regent Street. It's a famous shopping street in London. And someone filmed him on his phone and reported him, and he went to court and got disqualified.
And disqualified, meaning his driver's license was taken away, or he was no
That's
longer.
right. So here in the UK, we have a fine system and a point system. So some driving offences, like maybe wearing a seatbelt, it's not endorsable. That means there's no points, there's only a fine. But some offences get points associated with them, and everybody's allowed up to 12 points on their license. And when you reach 12 points, then you're automatically considered for disqualification. And a usual first disqualification is 6 months. Some offenses are so serious that people will generally be disqualified immediately, like drink driving, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes there's a get out, and about 1 in 5 people who reach 12 points employ a defense called exceptional hardship. And that means if they are supporting, say, somebody like Ibrahim, the young lad I work with, who has Down syndrome and obviously needs sometimes to be driven around, it would impose exceptional hardship on him if somebody driving him was disqualified. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But of course, with car normativity, the justice system is probably too easy on giving people exceptional hardship outs. So they're currently looking at tightening down on that.
Okay.
Yeah, some people get disqualified for a lot longer. I had one driver who I caught him at the very start of COVID lockdown in April 2020. I had to think back to what day that was. And yeah, he got disqualified for a year on the first disqualification. So I don't know what actually happened there, but I think he must have been disqualified once before within the last 3 years.
Okay.
And then I caught him again a year later in a different car, and that time he was disqualified for a further 2 years. So I'm not exactly sure what happens there, but I think that because he was disqualified before, he then gets longer and longer disqualifications.
Have you ever had any close calls with drivers, whether that's when you're on your bike without recording anything, or when you are, getting your camera in the face of someone who's driving for one of these videos? Have you had any, scary moments or moments where someone's been aggressive physically?
Oh yes, I think every cyclist that's ridden for more than a couple of hundred miles or so will have had frightening close passes done on them, very often in punishment for simply being on the road. They'll have had people pulling out from side roads and failing to give way. So I've had a number of those, and I don't see why we should have to tolerate that. I want people to be more careful when they're driving, not just for the safety of cyclists, but the safety of everybody else, pedestrians, other car drivers, horse riders, anyone on the road. I've also had some cases of people being aggressive at me when I've caught them.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one case was that of a driver on the wrong side at Gandalf Corner. So I should point out to your listeners that Gandalf Corner is a corner in Regent's Park in London. And it got called that, I think, because an American viewer, when they saw one of my first viral videos there, just piped up with the words "Bike Gandalf," as in "You shall not pass" to the Balrog. And I thought that was really cool, so I tweeted it. And since then, everyone's been calling that particular corner a Gandalf corner.
No way.
It's basically a corner where if you want to turn right, there's often slow traffic there, although that's died away in recent years. But some people want to turn right. So what they'll do is they'll skip the queue and go on the wrong side of the road, through a junction and across a couple of pedestrian crossings. So that's pretty dangerous, and it has a lot of cyclists who go the other way around that corner in the correct direction. And some of those are my friends, and I saw them complaining about these drivers. So I thought, you know what, I can go and make a difference there. So that's why it's called Gandalf Corner. Anyway, so one driver there drove into me and pushed me around, kept pushing me. So eventually I had no choice but to go onto his bonnet. And I got driven around the corner. Now, you got away with that, actually. Apart from a fine for going the wrong side of the keep left sign. We drive on the left, so for you guys it would be a keep right.
Right.
So that was a little bit of violence with the car. I've had a couple of people get physically aggressive with me. One of them I caught on the, well, actually both of them I caught on the phone. One I can't really talk about much, but he's due in Crown Court for assault with actual bodily harm in May next year. I can't talk about because obviously it's an impending court case.
Right.
Another one was a taxi driver. It was much less serious this time. It was really just a kind of a tussle. He wanted to try and steal my camera from me. But I stopped him. I'm not a particularly big or strong guy, but I was able to stop him. I did call the police because it was technically an assault. But in the end, I just let the police make a note of it, and I didn't ask them to charge him. And just that, I just reported him for his mobile use.
Is that pretty much the extent of the the negative responses, like physically, that you've gotten?
Yeah, there've been a couple. I mean, I get some shouting and swearing sometimes. I'm not really too bothered by that. Apparently, it's quite normal for humans to react like that when caught out doing wrong.
Right. Well, so
The
I,
camera stops
yeah,
the worst of it, I think.
right. That makes sense because they're being filmed and that, yeah. I just, watching your videos as an American, feel scared for you because I know if this was happening in the US, I think the result would be much different. And I saw that on your Twitter or X that you had reposted that pedestrian in Oregon who was killed by a road rage driver. I don't know if you even remember reposting this, but that triggered exactly what I had been thinking of, with all of the work that you're doing. That well, I guess I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Do you think someone in the US could have as much success and stay physically safe doing what you've been
I
doing?
don't think lots of people tell me how people in the US will be more, or any part, maybe in different parts of the UK even, would be much more violent and I wouldn't survive. I think we're all humans. I think we're all very similar in our reactions. So I don't think that American drivers would react much differently than UK drivers. And even say in Russia, I like watching that channel, if I don't know if you know it, called Stop a Douchebag.
No, I've never heard of it.
It's really quite interesting to watch. And basically they're a bunch of Russian pedestrians and drivers who stop drivers going on the pavement. And watching them gave me quite a good idea of how to stay safe around people who are driving badly. So yeah, the thing I fear most maybe is somebody driving over me, but I'm relatively careful not to let myself get in a position where a driver can directly and easily drive on into me. So for example, if I've filtered past, this is lane splitting, which is legal in the UK. I know it's not legal everywhere in the US. So quite a lot of the drivers I catch whilst filtering up past a queue of traffic. If I am going to go back to the near side, I generally won't cross in front of the car I've just caught. I will go a car or several cars in front before going back onto the near side, the curb side. And if I am with a driver who's getting angry, I'll stay kind of near the rear quarter. You can't really drive into somebody from the rear quarter, and unless it's a car that has rear wheel steering, which very few have at the moment.
Right.
I'm also prepared to disengage and move away really quickly. If a driver gets out and gets physical, well, so far in about almost 1,600 reported drivers, I've only had a couple and they haven't been too serious.
Well, I'm glad.
One is serious enough to go to court. Sure, I mean, I was wounded and stuff, but that was, I'm okay with dealing with that level of violence. I'd be much less okay with dealing with, say, a knife. I haven't had to face that yet.
And no guns drawn on you, I'm sure.
No, not in the UK. People keep saying, but you get shot in the US. And if I'm in a place in the US where people are carrying guns, I mean, I don't like violence, but perhaps if I were doing this and felt that strongly, maybe I would be carrying a gun. So I don't really understand that argument either.
Hmm.
I prefer not to carry guns and not to be involved in guns at all, to be honest.
Right. It escalates things, or it could.
It's never a good thing, right? And
No.
to be honest, a motor car is as or more dangerous than a gun anyway.
Right. You can do a lot of damage with it for sure. So okay, so getting back to the YouTube side of things, how did you decide to start going on YouTube and filming this, and what's the response been?
Yeah, so from about 2006, when I first started YouTubing, up until 2019, I didn't have very many viewers. It's relatively small. But my purpose there was in just showing people that this is what they do on the roads is not private. It's in public, and the public can get to see if you do bad behavior on the road. I also used it to show companies what their drivers had been doing, and then eventually hidden or unlisted YouTube videos were our way of getting videos to the police. So yes, it's about showing what's out there. It's about showing how bad road crime is out on the roads, and it's also about encouraging other people to use cameras. Because by myself, I can affect maybe only a couple of hundred drivers a year. But via social media, especially now that I'm better known, I can affect millions. Um, well, I hope I can, but and I've certainly got a string of driver comments on saying how they've changed how they drive because of my videos, which I feel pretty good about, and I'm really grateful to them. I respect them for changing their views and improving.
Right.
You can imagine when I learned to drive in Zimbabwe, that's not really the most conducive environment to good driving. I suspect I was like any young man, driving probably with reasonable amounts of skill, but maybe faster than perhaps I should have done, and perhaps with less judgment than I would do now that I'm much older. So I certainly learned and improved when I came to the UK. And I learned a lot about my own cycling and driving from watching how I dealt with conflicts on the road, because I'd go back and look at stuff on the camera. I reckon that's improved my cycling most of all is seeing what's happened in the past and seeing what I could do better.
And I
Most of the changes involve not riding in the gutter, not riding on the side of the road, but riding out more in the middle of the lane.
So that's a strategy of yours, is to ride less actually out of the way for cars and more so that you're clearly a user of the road, not on the margin.
Yes, very much so. But it does depend on the road. I mean, some roads are really wide, and I suspect more roads in the US are wide enough that it's cool to ride on the edge. But particularly here in the narrower roads you get in the UK, many of the lanes you have are just not wide enough to share with a car and a bike.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly if you then have parked cars on the side, because then you have to allow extra space for someone opening a car door.
Right.
And I believe being doored by somebody in a parked car is one of the biggest causes of killed and seriously injured cyclists in London. It's not a good statistic, but it shows just how important it is to stay away from parked cars.
Well, back to, growing your audience, I gotta believe that having, knowing that people are going to be watching your videos too, and hopefully spreading the message or changing their own behavior keeps you motivated, in addition to what you talked about earlier for motivating you to keep doing this work. Does that play a role, would you say?
Yeah, big time. I mean, that is my point. I'd rather not film somebody. I'd rather they stop the unsafe behavior. And I'd rather the YouTube channel would motivate more people to catch drivers, because then drivers all across the country are gonna be more worried about being caught, and therefore are going to behave better.
So talk to me about the filming side of things, and because surveillance is an interesting thing that I think about sometimes, at least around where I live and a lot of bigger cities in the US, everyone has cameras on their, by their front door, within their house.
Yes.
And now, people have dashboard cameras in their car, and, cyclists with cameras. Do you think Well, two questions, I guess. Do you think that we should continue moving in a surveillance heavy world? And does it affect your own experience, recording a lot of your time on the bike?
So that's quite a hard question. So speaking generally as to surveillance, I kind of generally think it's a positive thing. Perhaps I'm more skeptical when it comes to Big Brother surveillance, where governments and large organizations have power over that data. Um, so that is slightly more worrying. But when it comes to you and I, the Joe public, having cameras, I think that's probably a very good thing. It's more little brother. It's done more to benefit society, but for most people. Um, particularly when it comes to reporting road crime. But it is a good question. I don't really know the answer, but I can't help thinking that because as human beings, none of us are perfect, and some of us much less so than others, that the only way to try and stop some of these bad behaviors we see on the roads and other criminal behaviors is to have more surveillance.
Cool.
But yeah, I'm certainly, I don't think I have all the answers, that's for sure.
No, no, and that's not the point either. It's just, it's just interesting to hear your thoughts as someone who's on the street regularly with the camera. The follow-up question I have is just, does it affect your experience as a cyclist, when you have your camera rolling, and you're kind of on the lookout for drivers who are, breaking the law? Does it make it harder to relax and really just enjoy your commute and just that part of your day?
To be honest, this is London. It's a really busy city full of congested traffic. So not really is the answer no. You've to ride well in London, you've pretty much got to have your head on a swivel, as any experienced cyclist knows. And that's hardly different from seeing drivers break the law or not. It's also relatively a low cognitive load for me because I've done this for so many years now. I don't even have to try to spot stuff. I have noticed how my eye has become more and more like a traffic policeman. Not that I want to be a traffic policeman, and my memory for number plates. I don't think that's necessarily a good thing, but it's in the end, it's what's happened to me, whether I wanted it to or not.
Well, practice makes perfect, or makes whatever you've been doing easy
Yes.
to do.
So yeah, it's just for me, it's most of the time just riding. It doesn't. When last year I rode the length of the Rhine, I flew my bike to Switzerland and I rode from Andermatt all the way to Rotterdam.
Oh
It was
man.
fantastic month-long holiday camping, and I had a GoPro with me, but obviously I was filming almost nothing there, and I didn't feel the need to film. And I don't think I had very many bad drivers, a couple, but hardly any in 1,000 miles. And I felt just as relaxed there as I do here. Maybe the only thing I had is I had less bad driving to worry about. It's not, I didn't feel indifferent about wanting to catch bad drivers, if that made sense.
Hmm.
So it's really the only thing that leaves me stressed a little bit when is worrying about what a bad driver might do to me. But the camera thing, well, I'm nearly always recording when I'm riding in London, so it feels pretty normal.
Well, I'm glad you had a good bike trip. I was gonna ask actually if you like to ride, for fun and do longer trips like that outside of your commute. So that must have been spectacular.
It was one of the best holidays of my life. But yeah, mostly I'm just a utility cyclist. I'm really quite Dutch that way. I don't really cycle for sport. I just cycle for transport. And most of that holiday was less about the cycling and more about the camping and being in the outdoors.
Hmm. Well,
And
that's awesome that you made it happen.
growing up in Zimbabwe, I love the outdoors. I love wildlife. So that kind of stuff probably will rate quite a bit with many Americans. Most of
Right.
the UK feels like a big tended garden to me.
And less wild. Is that
Oh,
what you
it's
mean?
not
Yeah.
wild at all. It's like just it's a garden, somebody's back garden kind of thing.
And so you feel like you miss the wild feeling sometimes? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, of course. I think anyone that spent time in Africa will have Africa enter their heart. The amazing friendliness of African people, the culture, the outdoors lifestyle, the bush. I do miss it, of course. UK is great too. Every country has stuff that's good about it and stuff to enjoy.
Right. Well, that's really good perspective to have. I wanted to ask about the back to the police thing. Since you've been doing this for so long, is there any sort of partnership, or do they give you any sort of reward or incentive to do the work that you do financially, or no?
So the answer is no, it's all civic duty. I mean, obviously, I do make money from YouTube and occasionally from videos where celebrities are involved.
Hmm.
That's not my goal. I would do this regardless of making money or not. Um, but I do kind of wish it was a bit like the idling law in New York City, where people can make money, a proportion of the ticket by reporting. I feel there should be something like that here, if only because it will get lots of members of the public doing this, and it will really strongly affect road safety.
Right. As soon as someone knows that they can make a quick buck simply by going about their day, it's got to spread like wildfire.
Well, exactly, especially when you realize how little time is involved in doing these reports. I know that something similar is done in Moscow with Stop a Douchebag. They quite often will report drivers on their app and they get a proportion of the fee.
Hmm.
It's not a cycling channel, but I definitely would recommend you watch it. It's pretty fantastic.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Well, yeah, it's interesting to see all, there's so many different ways that people are trying to make a difference, and this is you being one of them, and sounds like this other channel as well.
There's so many people doing this, this kind of thing. I think I'm not in the top 10 of people reporting road crime in London, as in members of the public.
And when you say top 10, do you mean by like number of reports?
Yeah, by volume. I mean, obviously, I'm the most well known at the moment,
Right.
but other people have been more well known than me in the past. So, for example, Cyclegaz and Magnetom, they're quite well known names. Um, and I think across the UK, there are sort of tens of thousands of cyclists and maybe hundreds of thousands of dashcam drivers doing the same. We saw a Freedom of Information report. Are you aware of what those are?
No.
So basically, members of the public in the UK can ask for information from government departments on stuff that the public should know. And this particular request got the West Yorkshire Police, and the UK is split into different police departments in different areas. And in their area of West Yorkshire, they had something like 2/3 of reports came from drivers and 1/3 from cyclists and pedestrians, which is quite interesting, right?
Yeah.
So it's not even that cyclists are doing it more than drivers. I think maybe more cyclists proportionally, but there's more drivers so that, drivers also want to put an end to bad driving.
Right. And it's so easy with a dashboard cam. You're just going around and
Just
something's
hit
going to
that button
happen.
to save the loop, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then the other really interesting thing was that the driver reports only resulted in far fewer actions by police, and proportionally 1/16 as often as cyclist reports. And that suggests to me that drivers are much less good at knowing what road traffic offenses are and what is actually bad driving.
Hmm.
And weirdly, like here in the UK, you have most drivers thinking that cyclists are the most law breaking on the roads. And apparently it's not so at all. I've seen two studies, one that was done in Denmark, and another I think was in Florida. And both of those found that cyclists were slightly more law abiding than drivers. The
Only,
Denmark one found that cyclists were a lot more law abiding than drivers.
I believe that they're very much like the Dutch in terms of their cycling knowledge, I feel like.
And I have a feeling it's probably the same here in the UK and the rest of the US. So I think this is also supported by what you see with that West Yorkshire Police Freedom of Information request.
Hmm.
So it's quite the opposite from what many drivers think.
Right.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, that is interesting. And cool that you were able to see that information as well. So, do you ever, a question for you, do you ever zoom out and like the impact that you're making is so important and it's huge, the impact that you've made over the years. But do you ever think sort of bigger picture, like what's the overall solution? Like, is it getting more people like you to do this, or are there more structural changes that maybe you've felt like you wanted to be part of, or that could happen? Like, what is the solution, or have you thought of it?
That's a very good question, very insightful. So I think that what I'm doing is really only a tactical change. Given the nature of we humans, I think that some degree of policing is always going to be required. What I do isn't really policing, it's more witnessing, but it's witnessing is part of a police. I don't know if you've seen the famous quote from the founder of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Robert Peel. And his one of his principles is that the police are the public and the public are the police. The police are the only members of the public who are paid for duties which are incumbent on all citizens for the welfare of society. Something along those lines, anyway.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that'll always be necessary. But I don't think it's the big change that we really need. I think the big change that we really need is to have much more Dutch quality infrastructure. That we really have to change our roads and cities to be much more like the Netherlands. And I think that that will lead to better road safety and better quality of life for everybody. And there is an element of reducing driving in that and of limiting driving. And I do think that's quite important because by having more people able to cycle and to use buses and trains and tubes, the underground, the metro,
Mhm.
I think that will leave more room on normal driving roads for those that actually really do need to drive. I don't think the current dominance of cars is the right thing, but I'm not against cars either. I mean, we all need cars sometimes. For example, with this young lad I work with, we quite often need to drive because he can't walk very fast, so that limits his range. And I do cycle with him on a tandem, but
Oh,
even
nice.
then, that also limits stuff for him because he gets tired more quickly than I do.
Right.
So yes, I just feel that going the Dutch way is much more pleasant. And you've obviously, I guess you spent some time in the Netherlands,
Yes, fortunately, I've been able to visit my family out there a few times. Yeah,
so you know just how pleasant that outdoor terrace lifestyle is,
it's
cafe
unbelievable.
lifestyle.
Yep.
There's just nothing to beat it. It's fantastic. And you're not really limited in your driving. There's just places where it's not appropriate or useful to drive a car anymore. And it's actually better that way. Everybody has a greater time,
Yep. Win,
I
win,
think.
win. Yep.
So yes, I do feel that infrastructure is probably the biggest change. The second biggest change towards road safety will be as we get more and more cars with GPS speed limiting. I don't know what the status is in the US, but it's coming in the EU. And to start with, it'll be optional, so people could turn it off. But as more and more new cars come in with speed limiting, that will have a strong effect on road safety.
So what is the speed limiting? Can you talk about it for a second?
So I'm not sure of the exact details, but I believe it's GPS speed limiting, and it keeps the car to whatever the speed limit on the particular road you're on is at. And from what I believe is speed here in London is around about the main contributing factor to around 50% of fatal collisions.
It makes sense, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I was younger, I was not very good with speed. Luckily, I'm more cautious than some of my friends, than well, most of the people I know. I don't know if that's saying very much though, because I've done a lot of extreme sports. So I never came brutally short with speeding, but I can see why so many collisions involving speeding can happen. So I'm not very keen on speeding, and I think that as we get more and more cars with these speed limits, some drivers will disable them and some won't. But the result is you'll have maybe in the beginning 1 in 10 cars with a speed limiter on, and that'll automatically limit other people from being easily able to overtake them, and it'll improve road safety a lot.
That's
And
super
eventually, I think
interesting.
nearly all cars will have speed limiting.
Yeah. So on the note of improved technology in cars, what are your thoughts on the increase in touchscreen use on car systems and moving away from physical controls?
Yeah, I think that's really bad. I think that's a huge mistake, and I hope that lawmakers will reverse that at some point. I mean, I'm pretty reasonably okay with someone changing the radio with physical knobs or the heating or the AC, for example. But I'm really not okay when you've got to dive through menus on a touchscreen.
It's just as bad, if not worse, than using
Yeah,
your
there's a good
phone.
graphic in terms of research from one of the road safety institutes here, showing how Android and Apple CarPlay are really bad um, for distraction levels. Funny enough, they put Apple CarPlay as quite a fair bit worse than Android CarPlay, which amuses me as an iPhone user.
Huh. Do you have any idea why?
No, no idea at all.
Huh. I've never seen the Android version, the Android Auto. So harder for me to visualize. But I mean, the CarPlay is just it's a bigger version of your phone. I mean, you have the the inputs that you can do are much simpler. It's, play, pause, and looking through
Yes.
menus, but it's the same distraction level.
My friend has a relatively new electric car, and it's like a spaceship. He's in fact, we grew up together in Zimbabwe. We used to fly radio controlled model aircraft together. Now we're doing it here in London. So I quite often go in his car along to competitions. It's interesting watching all the technology in his car. Like it shouts at you if you lane change without indicating.
Really?
And stuff like that. I'm quite keen on things like the automated emergency braking type things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll save some lives too.
Right. Especially the ones who are distracted and not about to rear end
Yes.
someone. Yeah, right. Wow.
I'm sure
Yeah,
technology has a part.
totally. Yeah. And infrastructure, I think I totally agree with you. And that's one of my biggest frustrations with being in the US is the lack of focus on mass transit and making that the social norm. It's always just focus on building more roads and making the highways wider and all of that, which it won't solve the problem.
It's absolutely, and it's I don't really even blame the US. It's just because the US did most of its road building through a time of when cars were king.
Right.
So, it's just a natural function of that. And, luckily Europe has had a bit less of that because roads were around so much more before the car.
Right. And it's a more compact space. So,
Well, it had to be, and that's because so many roads were, people weren't living there. They were living there in the time of the horse and cart and earlier. So stuff was built in a compact way. If you build stuff when cars are around and cars are king, of course you're going to spread it out more.
mhm, right. So are there any infrastructure movements or things that are going on in London or UK more generally that you're aware of that are kind of getting you excited about the future?
So sadly, it's very hard to get infrastructure here, probably similar to what it is in the US. We've had a bit of luck. So funnily enough, in Hyde Park, where I catch most of my phone drivers, because it's on my commute, that there's a section of exceptional high quality cycle lane there to Dutch quality standards. Um, and of course, the irony is that some of the phone drivers I catch complain about me not being in the cycle lane, which is fair enough. And I'm like 99% of the time I'm riding that in that cycle lane. I only ever come out of it when I need to get up close and personal to get enough evidence for a phone conviction.
Right.
But yeah, that kind of cycle infrastructure is really good, and it's encouraged lots and lots of people. I think now there are similar ones on many of London's bridges, and it now cycle traffic in rush hour far outweighs car and other traffic on those bridges
Oh, amazing.
by numbers, which is a huge change from what it was a few years ago. You know how they say, build
Yeah.
it and it will come, and they will come.
It's so true. Yeah.
But unfortunately, you get a lot of territorial behavior from car drivers who don't want to give up an inch of road to other forms of transport, and particularly taxi and private hire drivers. For some reason, they really feel possessive about the roads. Forgetting, of course, that most roads, certainly over here in the UK, predated cars.
Right. Right. But no one's thinking about that because it was so long ago. They're only thinking about current and what their future looks like.
And the weird thing is, it's actually it's to their benefit. The more people that cycle, the more driving space there is for people who have to drive and have to, or even for those who really, really want to keep on driving.
Right.
And that's just purely because putting space for cyclists means a much more efficient use of road space. Whereas driving is probably the most inefficient user of public road space.
It's more efficient and it ends up being safer for everyone.
Exactly. And you
So,
save a huge
yeah,
amount of money on the health service because people are healthier and live longer. So
right.
and when health does taper off, it generally tapers off relatively quickly, like in the Netherlands. That extra exercise is very good for public health.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I have a couple wrap up questions here, Mike, and then I'll let you get back to your afternoon here. What's your favorite part about living in London and in the UK?
To be honest, I think I prefer living in the Netherlands just because that's
Okay.
my background. That's where my
Right.
family is.
Yeah.
But I do still love living in London. I love the royal parks. They're just such amazing parks. I love the buzz and the vibe of London. You can eat so many different kinds of foods from anywhere in the world you like here. There are, even though it's a big city and there's some element of that crusty exterior you get from people living in big cities, there's still a good friendliness that when you break through to people, I just really like living here.
Do you think you'll ever go back to the Netherlands?
I don't know. I mean, I've got my job and my kids keeping me here, so it wouldn't happen in a hurry. Maybe in retirement.
Right. So we'll see what happens.
Exactly.
So outside of cycling, what are some things that you like to do for fun or some of your hobbies?
Yeah, I like reading books. I read a hell of a lot. I always have done. And flying radar controlled models. I do quite a lot of that, and sometimes with some quite expensive ones. This is a smaller version. I've got one right here. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite it's not cheap, unfortunately. These are that one was built in Ukraine, so I have a bit of a personal connection to Ukraine.
Huh.
For some reason, Ukrainians and Polish people are just particularly talented at building composite model aircraft.
How did you get into that?
Yeah, I've always liked flying. I used to fly full-size gliders in Zimbabwe at the gliding club. I was an assistant gliding instructor, and I like flying models. I don't know what it is, but it gives me a huge pleasure. And hanging out with friends, having a barbecue, flying in a competition, that's all really good stuff.
So when you were saying you were driving to a competition with your friend, that's what you're talking about, is one of these.
Exactly.
So you compete in these and like you yourself are competing or no?
Yeah, I'm okay as a pilot. I'm not massively good. I kind of stopped flying for quite a few years when I came to the UK, which was maybe a stupid thing to have done. That friend of mine who has the space age car, he flies in world championships. He's a really good pilot, as is his brother.
Wow. Wow. I had no idea this was even a an
The
option
thing,
for a hobby. That's so cool.
one of my gliders is really big. It's got like a 4 meter wingspan.
Oh
It's
my
a different
gosh.
class to this one.
Wow.
The last time I was in the Netherlands, I was there partly to see family and partly to fly in a competition.
Cool.
Even the Dutch guys were amazed that I pitched up on my bike with this giant glider inside a specially mounted box on the back of my bike.
You had it on your bike.
No, amazing, a 4 meter glider, huh?
Did you disassembled it? Yeah.
Yeah, it comes
Yeah.
apart into lots of pieces, and
Wow.
and all my camping kits because we were camping at this competition.
Wow. That's awesome.
So, yeah, I just because I don't have a car right now. I don't I mean I'm fine with owning a car. It's just I don't need one, so I'm not going to bother with the money of owning a car.
Right.
So then I had to get a bit inventive with carrying stuff.
Right. Well, it forces you to maximize the potential of your bike, right?
And it's surprising how much you can carry on a bike. Um, I mean, I also have a two-seater kayak. It's an inflatable one, but a drop stitch one, so it's almost as good as a hard, not quite
Right.
as a rigid kayak. And I quite regularly take that on a trailer on the back of my bike.
Oh, cool.
It's just because, and it's almost as easy as it would be in a car. So it's immense the stuff you can carry on a bike. So and that's why one of the reasons I haven't really bothered to buy a car in London. When I live further out, I did used to own a car. I had a BMW 5 Series. That'll shock some cyclists. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's when I did need to drive, but now I don't. So why have a car then?
Right. You can do everything with your bike and then, use
Yeah.
other transportation when you need to.
And if I need a car, I'll rent one.
Right. Well, Mike, I really appreciate your time. It's been awesome chatting with you. I feel like we could talk for hours more about road safety and all of that good stuff. But it's been really cool to hear your perspective and your experience, and I'm grateful to have connected with you. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out to me, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, let's keep in touch and yeah, keep doing what you're doing and stay safe on the bike out there.
You too, man.
Cool. All right, thanks, Mike. Well, have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye. Alrighty, thank you for listening to my conversation with Cycling Mikey. There you go, a little rhyme at the end for you. Hope you enjoyed. I had no idea what to expect going into this conversation because I have never met Mikey in person, and I didn't know what he would be like because his following on YouTube is largely positive, but there are people who have reacted negatively and saying that he is not a police and shouldn't be doing the things that he's doing, and argue that maybe he's not actually solving the problem. But you've heard me say this, but there, I don't think, is a clear, easy solution for distracted driving, and what Mikey does is not really going out of his way because it's just him on his commute. He has a camera and he just uploads his recordings to the police and they take care of the rest. So not much that he's doing to bend over backwards to try to get people in trouble. He's just trying to make the roads that he travels on his bike safer, and I think that's excellent, and we could all benefit from the work that he's doing. Also interesting to talk to someone in a different country about their own distracted driving problems, because it's easy to forget that the United States is not alone in this problem. There are countries that have a much better culture around distracted driving, a much safer culture, a more cycling-friendly culture, but it's a worldwide problem, distracted driving, that is. And we can all do our part by driving distraction-free ourselves. So check out eyesupride.com/resources to learn how you can make a difference in your own life and share it with some friends. That is one way that we can all make a big difference. Thank you again for listening. Stay tuned. Subscribe to the Eyes Up Life podcast wherever you're listening now. And give Eyes Up Ride a follow on Instagram. And we'll keep you updated on any updates that there are to share. In the meantime, be safe. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.